Hello everyone, welcome to the learning series. Thank you so much for being here and participating in this training module. For this particular module, we're going to be going over positive behavior supports, restrictive and prohibited restrictive interventions, as well as a bit of an intro to safety care. There's some principles and terminology that are quite applicable to crisis management, and I'd like to introduce that as well as part of our training course. So welcome, thank you again for being here. A bit of our agenda for today will focus a lot on positive behavior support, as well as understanding behavior and how that all correlates with each other. We'll touch on some tools that I think are going to be really helpful for you to apply with participants hopefully on a daily or situational status, depending on what you find best. And then we'll also cover what behavioral support plan means, when it's appropriate to implement those, and what does that look like for you and your participant or your loved one. And then, like I said, we'll touch on a bit of a safety care intro to tie it all back together. So, as we talk about positive behavior support, I think it's good to identify what it means and understand how it's applicable to you and your participant or your loved one. The main principles of positive behavior support are rooted within having a person-centered approach, values, and focus on positive and meaningful outcomes with participants. So if I read the definition here, the goal is to commit to approaches that embrace each participant's unique strengths and challenges and engage each participant's circle of support as partners in developing and implementing a positive behavior support approaches using the least restrictive intervention. The way that I like to present this to team members, especially those that haven't had much experience with positive behavior support in the past, is this is like your first line of support that you can start providing participants in a way that is healthy, in a way that reduces imminent risk of harm to themselves or to others. And it's a way to reduce possible risky behavior, especially when, being introduced in a situation where it could be high stress, high critical, something that you may foresee as a need to implement positive behavior support. Understanding behavior is going to be very critical, specifically, obviously, for your participant, but then also for yourself. Figuring out how you can both blend these two worlds where you can potentially foresee high critical situations or high stress, being able to mediate or manage or support in need when supporting participants. And I wanted to introduce a couple of principles that are hopefully going to be helpful for you as you connect with your loved one or your participant, as you continue to work with them. Open Learning Future had a really great learning module, and I'm going to be sharing a few videos from that particular course. It's if you're interested, it's called 5 Things You Can Do, and then they also have a second part, which is 5 more things you can do as well. But in the first one, it talks about really getting to know your participant and how critical and important that is. Remembering that all behavior has meaning and that there's intention, and understanding that can only lead to a closer partnership between each other. Assisting in creating a support plan. We talked about this in our previous course about a plan is great as an outline, but implementing it is the challenging part and also can be really fun. So understanding how we can really create a support plan specifically focused on positive behavior support and how you can start implementing that when need be. We'll also talk about a support plan for individuals who support participants. That means you, what you need, what is it that you, what type of tools or resources or potential types of skills would be helpful for you to know so that you can show up at your best and also have the right, almost like key to supporting that particular individual or participant. And I also like to say that as you're understanding behavior, it's good to avoid making assumptions. There's going to be a good portion of this where you're doing your absolute best and you're trying to manage and understand and get to know, but it's Also better to be very familiar with what type of participant you're working with, as well as building that trust so that assumptions don't have to be made. So in this first video, we are going to watch a couple of series. It'll focus up with a individual whose name is David, and he'll talk about what steps they took to try and get to know a participant or a person. Their name is Linda.
I met my friend Linda in an institution not far from this porch. She had lived there since she was an 8-year-old girl. And I was introduced to her by the staff at this institution. There was at this institution a psychology department of 30 psychologists, which I think is always dangerous. To gather that many psychologists together in one place is a dangerous thing to do. But they wanted me to meet Linda because I had just started consulting at this institution, and they wanted me to meet her because she was thought to have the most difficult behaviors. Among the things she did, she was very hurtful to herself and hurtful to people around her. Sometimes she could be aggressive to people, and she refused to do anything that they asked her to do. She used to wander around the institution with big paper bags full of magazines and her earthly belongings. She called these her baggies. And I liked her right away, but she didn't want to have anything to do with me. I just told her who I was and where I was from. I told her about my wife and my kids, and I asked her, do you mind if I spend some time with you? People are concerned about you, and I'd like to try to help. And she at first said, no, absolutely not. She said I was a doctor, and I am a doctor, but not the kind of doctor that prescribes medication. I remember telling her I'm not a physician, I'm a hypochondriac. And this she didn't get, but I kept trying. Over and over again, I'd meet with her and just say, would you like to just spend some time? And the way I think she was interpreting that was that I wanted to sit down with her in an office and talk to her and fill out some kind of evaluation, and nothing was further from the truth. But I said to her one time, look, we could just do something that's fun. And she said she wanted to go to lunch to Golden Corral. So that's how we started our relationship, was just a series of lunches at the Golden Corral, a restaurant. And one day, when I was leaving the institution, I was seeing lots of people at the time. She came to me and she got me to roll down my window and handed me a magazine, a catalog, a Christmas catalog, one of her prized possessions. And she said I could have this. And I was delighted. And she said, would you help me find my people? And that was the beginning of our relationship, helping her to find her people, not to solve her problem behaviors, not to fix her or change her, but to help her find her people.
What I think it's really important to take away from this video is that David really took the time to get to know Linda. They focused on their interests, what they liked, and even though it may not have been an immediate connection at the beginning, David didn't give up and continued to find ways. And again, the things that Linda liked, whether it was going to a restaurant or their belongings that were really sentimental and special to them. I think that is a way of behavior, and that is a way of already communication that in this case Linda is exhibiting, and we can take into effect when we're trying to connect with participants or loved ones. And I will say that you may already know your participant or your loved one because you've been there all their life, and you know them like you know the back of your hand, and that's completely fine. I think that there's always room to get to know them even more. The mind is an endless space of people's personalities, and even finding new interests and potential new hobbies or things that they may not like or do like is worth exploring and getting to know your either loved one or participant a little bit more. In our next video, we're going to talk about how asking permission is such a critical piece when working with and supporting participants, why asking permission is an integral part of change, and how you can incorporate it when working with those that you support.
Anytime we want to change our behavior, it's difficult. It's difficult to change one's own behavior, let alone help somebody else to change. Uh, it starts with a kind of asking. It's impolite not to ask people if they want some help. But in order for a person to actually change, to not just think this is a good idea, but actually change their behavior, they have to want to. They have to be motivated to want to. And so it just seems like a necessary starting point. And sometimes people assume that the individual can't make that decision, that it should be made for them by other people, but I think this is fundamentally wrong. I think it's critical, no matter who you are, no matter what your labels say about you, that you play a central role in deciding. You must decide, do I want to change or not? And when people do, it's tough. It's hard to change behavior even when you want to, but it's a starting point.
Biggest takeaway for this video about asking permission is ensuring that you're not only showing respect to your participants and those that you support, you're also giving them the power of choice. You're informing them and also supporting them in a way that isn't a demand, isn't just doing it for them. As an example, when you're working with someone, you can ask, hey, are you comfortable? Are you okay if I move you, if they're in a wheelchair, as an example, to the next part of the room? How would you feel if help you tie your shoes? Are you okay if I help you make this lunch with you? I think those are all different ways that you can incorporate asking for permission and ensuring that there's buy-in from the participant and they have control over the next choice that they'd like to. The next video that we'll watch is focused on behavior. This is particularly targeted to behavior is communication, and it's up to us to listen.
Well, the starting point for me always is that difficult behaviors result from unmet needs. The very presence of a difficult behavior tells me that something important that the person needs is missing. And sometimes something important that the people supporting the person need is missing. A way I like to think about it is that all behavior is meaningful. It's full of meaning. And the work is to spend time with people and get to know what's happening in their life and what are some of the things that they need. Examples of the kinds of things that people need are they need to be connected in social relationships. People who may be lonely, the only way in which they might show up in anybody else's field of view is that they have to exhibit difficult behaviors. I often say to people that ask people the question, who would the person be if they didn't exhibit difficult behaviors? And if they can't speak to that with some clarity, then I say, with all due respect, you're part of the problem. An assumption is that difficult behaviors are messages which can really tell us important things about a person and something about the life that they're living. And it is about spending time with them and listening deeply for what some of those things might be. Now, sometimes people don't have a formal means of communication, a way of letting us know what's going on. And so what we need to do is to what Herb Lovett one time called engage in respectful guessing. So if I meet someone, for example, who's 17 years old, who experiences disabilities, who may not have a formal means of communication, and their life is kind of miserable, I think to myself, what are most people who are typical in their development, who are about the age of 17? What's going on in their life? And are these same kinds of things present in this person's life?
One of the things that I found really powerful with this video is that we can do so much for participants by listening to behavior. And what I mean by that is, in this example that David gave, is that they almost put themselves in their shoes of the participant or the person that they were referring to. What does a 17-year-old look like, and what kind of challenges could they be having during this time? I think another way that you can incorporate this in when working with participants as an example is, let's say that you are out in a social outing and it's really loud and there's a lot of people and your participant gets either upset, potentially even almost angry. um, that is behavior shown that that setting is not for that participant, and there's other things that we could be doing where they can still have social and community interaction without overstimulating them to the point where they feel overwhelmed or that they can't interact or be themselves. Another example of this could be not giving a participant enough social interaction. Relationships are really meaningful and powerful, but when not exposed to being able to connect, with other individuals, that could potentially result in an unhappy participant who doesn't feel like they have a lot of connections with others. So how can we incorporate that behavior into creating more social interactions with either one other person, maybe learning how to say hi to other people on the street? There's so much that you can learn from an individual, even just by their behavioral mechanisms, but then just about how they interact within themselves and with others. In our next video, we're going to talk about why behavior it has meaning. We already discussed how behavior is communication, but I want to dive a little bit more deeper into understanding the meaning behind the behavior that participants or anyone can exhibit.
My wife, Cindy, who is a teacher of kids in school, loves children, says sometimes she gets the feeling that some kids, their problem behaviors are really designed to get people to be able to see them, almost as if they're afraid that they will disappear if they don't exhibit difficult behaviors. And a fundamental question we have to ask is, who would this child be if he or she didn't exhibit difficult behaviors? Who would this person be if they didn't exhibit difficult behaviors? And having clarity about that is critical to their well-being. But what some people learn to do is the only thing they know is that the only way to create engagement with other people is to have problem behaviors. It's become so normalized. They don't think something's wrong. They just think that's what I'm supposed to do. Isn't that how two people come to connect with one another? My friend Bob, when he and I first got to know one another, anytime I would talk to him or call him on the phone, he'd immediately start telling me about his medications and the problem he was having at the doctor's office and how the staff were mad at him and the next door neighbor was mad at him and pounding on his wall. Now we've developed a relationship over the years where I might say to him on the phone, well, before you get going on all that stuff, this is where you say, hey Dave, how you doing? How's Cindy and the boys? And he laughs and I laugh. But for Bob, he literally doesn't know because how to engage with people if it's not around problem behaviors. It's so normalized for him. Most of the people he knows in his life are paid to be with him, and most of them are paid to be with him around his problems. So he's not in a kind of practice of showing up and being all of the other people or other things that he can be. He's an artist, for example, an incredible storyteller, and he has a wonderful gift of remembering music from a long time ago. He's just so gifted in so many ways, but the way he thinks he's supposed to show up is have problem behaviors, but the purpose it serves is to create engagement.
When exploring behavior meaning, it's important to also consider the participants' current way of living. Are they exposed to enough interaction and engagement within the community, with their support circle, friends, family, that gives them that enrichment and almost purpose, right? To connect with others? Or are all of their interactions kind of focused on those that support them? That may be very different, and I'm not saying that one is better than the other, but I think it is worth considering for the exposures and the experiences and life challenges that have been thrown at them. They only sometimes know how to adapt a certain way, so being able to identify that and then finding positive behavior support to either change that behavior, especially when it comes to problem or high stress critical situations, or continue supporting them if they are able to adapt positively to a PBS plan. In the next video, we're going to talk about you. You, as someone who is part of a support circle, either maybe you're a loved one, maybe you're a guardian, maybe you're a friend, or you're someone who's a direct support professional, regardless of how you connect with a participant, you also matter. So keep in mind in the next video the question of what do you need?
Well, critical to a person's support are the needs of the people offering support. As Jean Clark has said, and I'm paraphrasing a bit, a person's needs are best met by people whose needs are met. And my experience is that often people who are offering support are not routinely enough asked the question, what do you need? How can we help you so you can show up every day and provide the support with integrity and with joy? A thing I do sometimes is when I meet a team of people that are supporting someone who has particularly difficult behaviors, is I ask them, imagine that nothing I could do today or anyone could do today is going to fix this problem. That for at least a couple of months, the person is going to be struggling, be having a really difficult time. There's no way to fix it. It will get better with time, but for the next couple of months, it's going to be rough. It's going to be tough. And then I ask people, what would you need so you'd be okay? So that you'd really want to come to work every day. You wouldn't have that knot in the pit of your stomach. What do you need so you can be hopeful and joyful? What do you need? And what's really kind of amazing to me is people often don't know how to answer that question. It's almost as if I'm speaking in a foreign language. They need an interpreter. They don't know what I'm getting at. They say things to me like, well, I need for her to stop biting. And I go, well, just imagine for a bit that nothing anybody can do is going to help that to happen, that she's going to be aggressive, she's going to bite like she has for the last, year or two, and she's going to continue doing it for a couple of months. What do you need so you'll be okay and want to be here? And what I found is you have to ask the question several times, because often people who are doing this work, or moms and dads, whoever it might be, they're so used to thinking about someone else's needs that they don't pay any attention to their own. We have support workers who are burning the candle at both ends of the day, waking up early in the morning and raising their own family and then getting off to work to do this work on behalf of someone they care about, and then getting home and pulled in 1,000 directions. But when I found that when you keep asking the question, people sometimes say things that are surprising. I'm always hoping people will say what we need is more consulting time with Dave Petoniak. We'd like to expand your hours next year, but they rarely say that. They say things like, one mom said to me one time, I need to go to my daughter's soccer practice. And I said, what do you mean? She said, well, my daughter plays soccer in high school, and I'm always promising her I'll go to her practices after school or go to her matches, but I'm not keeping my word very well. One thing or another is pulling me in an opposite direction. She said, and sometimes it's this work I do, and she said, I don't expect my job, the managers here to take care of me about this, but it's very hard sometimes when I'm feeling like I'm not being the mom I want to be, to come here and be fully present. And sometimes this man that she supported, has a difficult day, and we have to have this big meeting at the end of the day. And she said, I'm not only mad that he just tore the group home apart, I'm kind of mad at him now because I'm not getting to my daughter's soccer practice. So support for that individual on that team meant doing everything possible to help her get to as many practices as possible. And the manager didn't need to assume responsibility for getting her to any practice, but anything she could do to help her get to as many practices as possible, she did. So she might say to her, look, why don't you leave about 15 minutes early, beat traffic, get to the other side of town to your daughter's soccer practice. She did simple things like, do you have any pictures on your cell phone? How's she doing? And how's that knee she twisted last week? It was just the support this mom needed to be a team member. She needed support about stuff happening with her daughter. It might be that someone on the team says, when there's a crisis, I need backup that actually shows up, because we have a really good backup plan. It looks nice in our file drawer, but when the you know what is hitting the fan, uh, we call a number and we get an answering machine, or we get someone who says, we don't offer support to people with disabilities, we're the mental health side of the organization, or they say you have to call the local police, or it's not really support. People say all kinds of things. I feel embarrassed when I'm in town and he starts to take his clothes off. I don't know what to do, and I dread every day coming to work. It's about really creating support so you know what to do and maybe get some help when you do go into town from someone else who might be there with you. It's about any number of things. But in my experience, people who have their feet on the ground, whose needs are met, do extraordinary work, and they tend to make fewer mistakes. Because often what happens is someone is so sure something's going to go wrong and they're not going to know what to do that they begin to panic and begin to make mistakes that actually make the problem worse. So you really want to help people. You have to make sure that they are getting the support that they need.
It does not go beyond me or anyone in our team, the sacrifices and hard work that every one of you does. And it's important for us as either leadership or support management to know what we could do to support you as a DSP, as someone who's supporting somebody else. We all need help once in a while. We all need support and somebody to be in our corner. And know that we are here for you. If there's ever a time where you want to either have a listening ear, maybe you've had a difficult day and you had a challenging day with your participant and it's been a long week or maybe in a potentially long month, know that myself, Jim, David, all of us are here to support you as well as your direct supervisors. I also want to share that whatever you need is not too small or too big of an ask. We'll definitely work with you to figure out what it is that we can do to best support you so that you can be happy and you can show up at your best to work. Positive behavior support works best when you have a DSP or a parent, guardian, whoever's supporting a participant who is also showing up at their best, who can be there and ride out the challenging times with participants and give them the best outcome for success because they are also fulfilled and happy within their role or content within where they're at as well. I do want to shift a little bit of gears and just share that we do offer employment assistance program, also referred to as an EAP program, to all of our team members in the event that maybe you need a little bit extra more support or you're looking for something that is a little bit different or specific. Our EAP program focused with Work Life Hawaii, who is our vendor. They support our team members at either free of cost or very little, low to free. I also want to share with you all that there's other tools and resources that we have set in place to help you feel the most supported, and that is by incorporating our EAP program. EAP stands for Employee Assistance Program. It's either um, low cost or free resources for our team. We contracted it with Work Life Hawaii, they have been a wonderful resource to work with. If this is something that you're interested in, know that it's completely anonymous. We never know who's utilizing it or for what resources. All that we get to see is that we've had participation for the month or for that quarter. And that's what we want to see is that you're all utilizing it. As example, EAP can help with counseling, coaching, assistance potentially with elderly care, child care, legal assistance. If you're interested in doing any like in-person counseling, we do offer, I believe it's 10 annual um, visits that you can do with like a therapist for free. I strongly encourage you all to consider utilizing this and if this is something that you think would be helpful. And I'll also be attaching it to the email that we send out with the link of this. So you get a chance to either know what it is or give them a call to figure out what resources they could potentially be helpful with. And lastly, I want you to also know that If you ever have any questions or are looking to kind of potentially ask about something that would be helpful for you and what you need, feel free to always reach out to myself, to your supervisor, and we'll do our very best to make sure that, again, you are just as important as our participants. So I'm sure at this point you're thinking, okay, AJ, this is all great in theory. This has been really good, hopefully good material, but how do I actually implement this moving forward? What are some more specific tools you can give us? And so I'd like to introduce the CTDDS, Connecticut Department of Developmental Services, put together a few videos. They're actually available on YouTube. And if you have maybe an hour and a half to spare, I encourage you to watch their videos. We're going to watch a few snippets of some of the material that they were able to put together. And I thought it's really well, um, it's very cohesive and it explains how to actually implement this with those that you support.
One important point to emphasize when we're talking about collaboration is that we do so when it's clinically indicated, which is by and large many of the instances that we're involved in doing PBS work. However, the caveat is offered that there are instances, for example, when we have behaviors that an individual may engage in, such as problem sexual behaviors, fire setting, that are risky to the community. And at that point, the level of collaboration may change, and we certainly want to get buy-in by all the individuals involved as stakeholders in an individual's care, but there are instances where sometimes that is not possible, and again, we have to do so to protect the community. So some helpful techniques when implementing positive behavior supports. First of all, language needs to be clear, consistent, and concrete. Break things down into smaller parts. In all the years I've been doing positive behavioral support work, oftentimes, especially for caregivers, we put things out in language that's complex, sophisticated, and we simply overlook asking the person if what we're saying makes sense to them. We want directives to be broken down again into smaller parts that are accomplishable. For instance, only clean half or a quarter of the room to start. It makes it more manageable. We want to offer the person two or three choices, oftentimes that lead to a similar outcome, to provide the person with a sense of control. So completing a chore, when doing de-escalation techniques, and so forth. This is not about bargaining, because bargaining may lead to confusion or agitation. This is simply offering things in a clear, concise way that is streamlined to a particular set of outcomes. We want to give immediate reinforcement. In other words, we want to give explicit verbal praise within 1 minute rather than delaying it. I know Tracy and I have both seen instances where an individual with developmental disabilities is receiving praise for something that happened a week ago where they may not have a recollection. One exceptionally helpful technique is the use of something called compassionate inquiry. It comes from the world of cognitive behavioral therapy, and it's helping the individual build a positive sense of self. As the example on the slide points out, what does a particular behavior say or tell us about you? And oftentimes we can link that behavior to a positive attribution or a centering construct that the person finds very inviting and helpful. So for example, being a gentleman. And then lastly, one of the techniques that Tracy and I like is something called critical scheduling. So building a daily routine around the fact that less preferred activities are followed by more preferred activities to increase motivation. Very similar to the Premack principle. So for example, and again, pay attention to the language. It's not if then, it's when, after, or first you take a shower, then we go to lunch.
I hope that those tools were helpful into implementing positive behavior supports, especially when working with participants. At this time, I'd like to kind of change gears a bit. When talking about restrictive interventions, I want to be very clear that this only is applicable when positive behavior techniques have not been successful and they have been documented to show that they have not been successful. There may be times where the participant or those that you support are in immediate risk of harming themselves, potentially harming others. And so when implementing restrictive intervention, this should be a temporary type of technique that used only when necessary. This ensures that the participant is cared for and supported, and it should be done in a manner that's dignified, respectful, and it's free from abuse. Participants also have the same rights as and personal freedoms as those who don't have disabilities. And so when we think about restrictive potential intervention in this manner, it is a temporary, again, comes after implementation and being unsuccessful with positive behavior support. Some pieces that I'd like for you all to remember when thinking about ways that you may need to provide some restrictive intervention is that this is only meant to address immediate, imminent risk of harm. This is not to be used as threat or punishment for specific behavior or the participant, and they should have the right to be free of any restrictive intervention imposed to them for the purpose of either discipline or retaliation or because it's convenient to staff. That's not acceptable and something that is not ethical. And then also, restrictive intervention is not used for therapeutic purposes, nor for long-term type of support. You, at this point, hopefully, have been exposed to times where your participant may show times of high stress or feeling like you need to intervene. Restrictive interventions, as an example, could look like something like this. Perhaps you're waiting to cross the street with your participant, and they start to walk even though it's a red light and it hasn't shown that you're able to cross. Perhaps you may need to, gently either hold their hand or if they start to run off, grabbing them to ensure that they don't run into traffic. That could be a potential example. I also would like to introduce behavioral support plans, and this is intended for participants, really for all participants. But I have seen that the majority of them that use behavioral support plans are those that have high risk, very challenging potential behavior. This is intended to basically have a very well thought out plan of what to do when a participant has reached a hyperarousal, meaning that they are incredibly stressed, they're agitated, potentially angry, they're, potentially moving, um, punching, throwing. That's when behavioral support comes into play. And this is only provided by a um, licensed individual directed by DOH and DDD that specifically oversees safeguards in place when restrictive intervention are proposed for participants. So this is a very detailed plan. Direct support staff are trained in this BSP plan to ensure that they have the tools, the training, the knowledge of what to do in case something does occur. At Full Life, we have individuals who have very extensive knowledge when it comes to behavioral support plans, restrictive interventions, and so I'd like to introduce Jim Kilgore, our executive director, just to share a bit from their perspective on the topics that we have covered today.
A behavior support plan is created by a board-certified behavior analyst, and the BSPs are positive in nature. That's why they're called positive behavior support plans. They seek to understand what the behavior is communicating, like what's the function of the behavior, and they outline the environments and the situation that are most positive for the person. Those situations where that complex behavior is less likely to occur. A BSP teaches staff how to respond appropriately and teaches participants other ways to communicate their needs. Like, is there an alternative way to get out of a meeting instead of screaming? Could you simply get up and walk out, signaling you need a break? So restrictive interventions are sometimes addressed in behavior support plan as well. So, for example, if someone is engaging in like self-harming behavior, physical redirection or a staff prompt may be an effective intervention. We can, at Full Life, we can only use restrictive interventions uh, if the participant is in imminent, immediate danger of hurting themselves or others, or if they've been trained by a BCBA on an approved restrictive intervention that's written into a behavior support plan. Full Life will also train you with safety care if you support a participant who has a restrictive intervention listed in their behavior support plan.
When talking about behavioral support, waiver standards does offer a variety of lists to consider. I hopefully this is helpful to at least remember. So I put together a bit of a breakdown that behavioral support plans are intended to protect the participant. Hopefully, in a situation where you potentially foresee a high stress, high critical situation, you've used positive behavior methods as a primary intervention when addressing challenging behaviors and promoting independence, specifically with community integration. Um, However, if for whatever reason there's imminent risk that has failed and it's not as effective, then we utilize restrictive intervention. And that's where behavioral support plans can also come into more specific conditions of how to make sure that it's applicable, it's applied. Um, I also will say that any sort of restrictive intervention has a time frame. It's not meant for a significant period of time. It should be temporary, and there should be a time frame where this is controlled. Of ensuring that the participant is safe in a dignified and respectful way. The BSP plan is intended to support not only the participant, but you and those in the support circle by providing training, ensuring that you feel really comfortable with the intervention strategies that prevent challenging behavior, and ensuring that participants have a better quality of life because of it. And then evaluate. After the implementation of a potential behavior support plan or restrictive intervention, we do want to make sure that that is documented. Again, BSP is created by a licensed professional design or designee, as Hawaii state law requires. So not anyone can put a BSP together. It has to be a very well thought out and monitored plan. And we do have a contact that we can utilize to ensure that if you're interested or think that might be helpful for participants, that we do that in a dignified, respectful manner, like I said. Whenever there's times that we utilize behavioral support plans, a debriefing within the first 24 hours is important to understand what was helpful, what worked, what didn't, and incorporating that into potential other situations that might arise or potentially changing the plan itself. We've talked about this in the last couple slides that when there is behavioral support plan with restrictive interventions, team members have to complete the training and you'll be briefed and ensured that positive behavior supports and safe in mechanisms were implemented beforehand before jumping into the behavioral support plan. And again, the author and the designee of the behavioral support plan must conduct an initial and follow-up training to, again, you make sure that you have the right support, it is monitored, evaluated, and that we maintain proper records for DDD. In the next slide, I'm going to talk about prohibited intervention tactics. And I do want to give a little bit of a warning because some of these are, quite frankly, a bit hard to read. The fact that they have been put into the waivered standards means that they have happened. And of course, we at Full Life and, I'm sure many other service providers who follow the HCBS guidelines adhere to ensure the quality and care of participants. But I think it's important for you to also know what this looks like and how it potentially can result in abuse of a participant without care. So, prohibited restriction interventions can look like seclusion. My executive director, Jim Kilgore, gave an example recently about a participant who utilizes the wheelchair, and in order to get the participant to not move, meaning so like they don't move around or run away, or potentially, slap or hit other people, especially when feeling like in a high stress situation. He has seen use of like putting like a broomstick between the participant's wheelchair so that they're not able to move. He has also seen participants being put into a room and left alone for significant periods of time. That is, again, seclusion, that is abuse, and it's prohibited. So that's just like some examples that kind of come to mind. Um, Other procedures that include like electric shock, unpleasant tasting food, um, any sort of like bad smells or behavior that is restrictive, so like they're not able to move, whether it's in prone or supine positions, restriction of their wheelchairs, like I talked about earlier, not having a safe space for them to, as an example, breathe, or it causes restriction within their like diaphragm or puts too much weight or pressure anywhere on the body is completely inappropriate and also part of prohibited intervention. Any physical as well that involves like punching, hitting, poking, shoving, like anything like that, again, prohibited. Um, and any part that where techniques are used that the participant is not free and is put against their will is again part of restrictive interventions. Additional unacceptable interventions include verbal, physical abuse, mental and emotional harm, unreasonable confinement, um, denial of food, restrictive of communication with other people, overcorrection, or taking away any sort of like resources that either is like in a monetary form or it could be really anything that the participant may need, medication. Again, completely unacceptable and something that if you ever fear that that this is occurring with the participants, please let us know immediately and we will take immediate action to ensure that it is fully investigated and we can find alternate ways to support the participant in a healthy and supportive manner. All right, y'all. Thank you again. We are now almost at the end here. We talked about positive behavior support. You now know restrictive, when it's applicable for restrictive intervention, behavioral support plan, and prohibited interventions. Now I want to talk about safety care. Safety care is a concept specifically focused on training designated for any type of staff who's working with either participants or those with intellectual disabilities that may be exhibiting challenging or dangerous behavior. It focuses on teaching de-escalation techniques for behavior management in various types of environment. And the key point of safety care is a couple of terminology pieces that we'll go over. The purpose of that is to create a positive supportive mechanism, similar to what positive behavior support is. This is to ensure that the physical and social environment of participants are safe, and that they're created, that they're there in the first place. Educate, teach functional alternative ways to challenging behavior, prevention of behavioral crises whenever possible, management of, as far as overseeing behavioral situation and ensuring that it's safe and managed in a dignified, respectful, and therapeutic manner, and decrease, hopefully diminish likelihood of future behavioral crises. This is all really helpful to kind of understand because it again ties really similarly to what positive behavior tools or actions you can do to reduce the potential risk of the participant going into high stress or hyperarousal. Some safety care terminology that's going to be applicable in the next couple videos that we watch is an antecedent. An antecedent is the event before the behavior has been exhibited, meaning that it's almost like understanding that there's a potential challenge that could happen based off of the way that your participant shows different types of communication, whether it's verbal or nonverbal, and through their behavior. Obviously, behavior, we know that it's the observable, measurable action, meaning that the action that they did, whether it's hitting, biting, throwing, maybe leaving the area, shutting down, and then the consequence, which is immediately followed by the behavior. It could be getting attention, escaping doing a task, or accessing a preferred item. There are many options, I should say, of antecedent interventions, and these are just a few of the many I have seen be utilized. But I'm sure that you all do this in different ways. That you connect with participants. As examples, an antecedent could be giving participants choice, giving the opportunity of one or more options. Like, hey, maybe do you want the red apple or do you want the green apple? That could be a choice as far as anticipating potential challenges. Prompting, instruct, gesture, demonstrate, or model. Priming is to provide relevant information beforehand. In the example I gave before, where maybe the participant is going to a large social gathering, is the support mechanisms or DSP, parent, guardian, whoever's there to support them, gives them enough ample information ahead of time. Hey, we're going to be going to the social event. We can potentially anticipate a lot of people. How do you feel about that? Are you comfortable doing that? Do you want to start slow? Do you want to go kind of stay in the back? Do you want to go with some friends? That's all priming. Time delay. This one I found particularly interesting because it encourages the participant to um, understand the prompt, and then you shorten the time frame of that prompt so to eventually they just do it on their own. So, for example, maybe you ask the participant to do a task, and then you wait maybe 5 minutes before you ask them to do it again. And then, maybe you wait another 2 minutes before you ask them again, until they eventually know that when you ask the first time, they can go ahead and do that. Or maybe it's like a task at work that they're being asked to do. That's also a really good antecedent intervention. And then the task itself, letting them know how long it's going to take, the instructional content and the difficulty. I always encourage you to work with participants to ensure that they have the necessary information. And feel free to, dab into some of these, all of them, to see what works best for you both. As we watched earlier, the Connecticut Department Developmental Services put together some really great tools, and I wanted to kind of show the approaches for positive behavior utilizing some of the safety care information that you just learned.
The next slide shows a hallmark area of positive behavioral supports, which is proactive versus reactive interventions. And we're going to talk about this at length. As you can see on the slide, Ben Franklin's quote, "An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure." Proactive interventions are far more effective than reactive ones typically. So the slide shows the difference between proactive versus reactive strategies and the benefits of using a proactive approach. So if we look across the first line, under column A, interventions that are proactive prevent the problem behavior. When using proactive interventions, we place an emphasis on teaching alternative behaviors. As Tracy mentioned, that's a key aspect of doing a functional assessment. And then lastly, under proactive, we want to reinforce the desired behaviors. In comparison, a reactive approach has a very limited focus on preventing triggers. There's little focus on teaching new behaviors, if at all, in the form of incidental learning. And then lastly, a punitive response to negative behavior typically produces very adverse outcomes. So you can see a proactive approach is highly favored.
So when we talk about a proactive and reactive approach, it really refers to the ability to intervene successfully at different points in terms of a person's behavior. So you'll see on this slide different points of a crisis. And many of you may be familiar with this cycle of crisis where we see all the way on the left side of the slide a person's baseline behavior. So they're functioning as usual. And then we have above it listed proactive interventions. So when a person is functioning well, this is a key time to teach new skills. Pete and I talked about this in the second training around when a person is stressed or agitated and their sympathetic nervous system is aroused, it is much more difficult to teach new information. So when a person is functioning reasonably well, this is where we might be doing that scaffolding and skill building. When there's an antecedent, which as we talked about earlier, may be internal or external, could be a fast or slow trigger, but when there's an antecedent, something that is occurring that is upsetting or agitating a person, this is another opportunity to utilize some proactive strategies. Coping skills, reminding a person of their emotion regulation abilities using distraction. It also may be a time where some reactive strategies are utilized. We're going to speak about some reactive strategies in a moment, but reactive strategies might be active listening or bringing the person to a calmer environment. So this phase between the antecedent and the escalation point is really critical, and we may be using a combination, but still the emphasis on the proactive intervention. Once a person exceeds the escalation point, in other words, the interventions haven't been successful, or for some of the people we serve, maybe they haven't used a positive approach, so there's been no interventions up until this point. We hit the crisis, and this is not a time where proactive interventions are effective. A person's capability is exceeded. Their emotion regulation skills are often not being able to be in good control. And so at this stage, the primary focus is reactive strategies. And we do want to have a plan for reactive strategies as part of a PBS. But our main work is in the baseline and in between the antecedent and the escalation phase in terms of a PBS approach.
When speaking of proactive interventions, a crucial aspect is setting and reviewing expectations. These are directions given and reviewed at regular intervals. The directions should be very specific and easily convey the expected behavior. An important point is we want to tell the individual served what we would like them to do rather than what we do not. And we want to state it in affirmative language. It takes some getting used to do this approach, but it is far more effective, especially when we have individuals who might have cognitive impairment in the area of working memory where they don't see different options, especially if emotions are at play. Again, pay attention to the language. So the directive is use a lower inside voice instead of saying stop talking so loudly. Keep your hands down rather than don't hit. Please keep your feet on the floor as opposed to don't kick. Only take things that we will pay for rather than stop stealing from the store. Learning problems and memory deficits, as I mentioned, may interfere with understanding and remembering what constitutes appropriate behavior. Also, individuals with developmental disabilities might experience what are called engrams. They're hot spots in the brain, if you will, where they may not hear the don't part of a direction. So it's very important to state things in affirmative language. Again, learning occurs in small steps, so we have to have realistic expectations, and we want language to be consistent across all settings.
I think that what's wonderful about that video is that it gives you very specific techniques that could be incorporated for a variety of different types of antecedent and ways and mechanisms to apply when having or implementing positive behavior support. I hope that by watching that video, you are now having a bit of a toolbox, that you're not alone as a DSP, and that you have those family members or advocates and even us as a service provider to ensure that you can provide the safest, most dignified strategy for participants um, to the best of your ability. Lastly, we'll watch one final video that will go over more specific tools and techniques that can be applied for participants and when working and supporting them.
So it's important to have a good basic toolbox when utilizing positive behavioral support strategies. So I'd like to review some of the integral parts of this toolbox, which are really good clinical skills. So the first is being familiar with the plan itself. And I know both Pete and I have seen where positive behavioral supports are less effective when people don't know how to utilize them, they don't understand the plan, or they're just not familiar with the intricacies of the plan. So this requires a proactive approach in terms of training so that everyone's familiar with the components of the plan. Often Pete and I will do shorthand or 1 to 2 page summaries of the plan so it can be quickly digested for people that may not be as familiar with the intricacies of the plan. Another key component to a toolbox for a PBS approach is avoiding triggers and eliminating, as best we can, provocations. A good understanding of the antecedents, which we spent time talking about during the functional assessment portion of this discussion, really helps us to understand what might cause a person to have a behavior of concern. And if we can minimize or reduce the potential antecedents, we can reduce the likelihood of a behavior of concern happening altogether. So a typical example of this might be a noisy environment. For some people that we serve, an overstimulating environment can be extremely provocative. It can cause behavioral agitation. So if we know this ahead of time, we can minimize that by bringing the person to a quieter environment or trying to reduce the noise in the environment altogether. So that's a good toolbox approach. Avoid what is causing or is one of the factors in terms of the behavior of concern. Positive setting events, prompting and cueing, is really helpful when we're working on teaching a new behavior. When people understand and know what is expected of them, they do far better than when they don't understand or there's confusion. Pete talked about this earlier during the presentation about giving simple and concrete directions, 1 to 2 step directions. So really making sure that the cues and the reviewing of the expectations are clear and understandable. This also helps a person to feel more in control and develop a sense of agency and self-esteem when they understand what's expected of them and they're able to fulfill that. Setting expectations proactively. So helping a person know this is what is expected. When we go into the community, we need to use an indoor voice. We need to keep our hands down by our sides, for example. So giving those proactive setting expectations in a very clear way so that when a person goes out, they know what to do and they feel good about doing it effectively. A daily routine is so critical, and this is often not emphasized enough when we think about the people we serve, how important knowing what is expected during the day and having a day full of activities that are meaningful and also are related to developing skills are really the foundation of everybody's life, right? So having a predictable, steady routine that has a blend of both leisure activities and skill building can make the biggest difference in terms of a person's ability to move through the stages of change. So daily routine that's predictable also brings a sense of competency and relaxation when one person knows what to expect. And then having that schedule written. So many of us rely on our phones. Now we have all sorts of ways that we rely on a schedule. Well, the people we serve need to have that same schedule as well. So whether it's using adaptive technology like an iPad or an iPhone, or just a written schedule, and it might be even pictures if a person has difficulty with reading, so that they have an understanding of what happens next. That gives a sense of competency and control.
To the end of using pictures, one of the techniques that we have used with individuals who have lower adaptive functioning is actually taking a picture of that individual throughout their day in the schedule, actually showing them completing different tasks or different parts of tasks and what the finished product might look like, and then having that as a reference point for them when we are setting expectations.
Yeah, and I think with our technology abilities, that there's so much more live training and ways to really enhance the schedule, the routine, and skill building. So that's a helpful point. Just a couple more interventions that I want to go over as part of this toolbox for positive behavioral support plans. So concrete directions. So we know that the people we serve have difficulty sometimes in auditory processing or language processing or multi-step directions. So being very concrete with the directions so that they're easily understood, easily encoded, and easily recalled, or recalled with some cueing. Being person-centered and context-centered. So we want to make sure that we're teaching behaviors that are appropriate for that particular context that the person is in, and also being person-centered, making sure that it matches with what's important to the person, right? So whatever toolbox, or if we're using a routine, or if we're using adaptive equipment, we want to make sure we're sensitive to what the person really values. Using sensory modalities, really important. So we know with the people that we serve, they sometimes have sensory integration issues or maybe verbal issues that render sensory modalities as being the key way to do emotion regulation. So it can be either an over emphasis on verbal language or sensitivity to the environment. But in either case, we want to make sure that our sensory modalities are implemented in a thoughtful way. So sensory modalities may include soft music, it may include soft touch, it may include aromatherapy, or different ways to utilize the senses to produce emotion regulation and coping skills and soothing. A multimodal approach, so we may be using visual aids, as Pete was talking about. There might be pictures of different behaviors or activities. It might be a to-do list. And also hands-on modeling. Hands-on modeling is so effective, especially when teaching a new skill, helping a person to actually see what is expected and how to do it. So modeling, really important in the early stages of skill acquisition. And then over time, that can be faded out. It can be done together. And then when the person starts to feel more and more independent, the coaching or the modeling can be reduced. Building a team approach, really important for our toolbox. We spoke about this earlier. A team approach is really critical for a positive behavioral support plan. That team approach may include, of course, the person who's receiving services, family members, caregivers, and different people on the team. It might be the one-to-one, paraprofessional, it could be the psychologist, psychiatrist. So just having that regular communication in a team that's working together to service the person, really important. And finally, the last two I wanted to speak about are planned attention. So we know from our functional assessment whether a person sometimes engages in behaviors because they need regular validation and reinforcement. So instead of having to utilize behaviors to get that planned attention, we want to be proactive and give planned attention, which is typically positive praise, as often as we can so that a person feels empowered, that they feel competent, and it can help with the self-esteem building. And it reduces the likelihood of having to utilize behaviors to get the support that the person really needs. So planned attention at regular intervals, we want to have that built in throughout a person's day. And finally, the idea of bringing fresh activities. All of us need novelty and spontaneity, so it's important to include that as well. Sometimes our positive behavioral support plans, because they have such structured activities and routines and interventions, we may lose sight of actually bringing something new and fresh or interesting to the person. So helping them to come up with new ideas, or sometimes just a spontaneous trip or opportunity to learn something new, can bring freshness and vitality into the plan and keep a person invested in wanting to participate in a positive behavioral support plan.
I hope that all of this information has been helpful, has given you some time to self reflect and think about how you'd like to incorporate some of these mechanisms and tools, especially when working with those that we support. That brings us to really the end of the training. And again, I'm just so grateful for your participation and your patience. The next training that we'll have will be August 30th, and we'll talk about adverse event reporting and abuse prevention. If you ever have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me or to any of our staff, and we'll be happy to respond to you at any time. Thank you for everything. Have a great day.